just for a minute. Do not tempt me.
These rooms with 2 doors, you know, it's really... So there's a handheld mic if there's any problems. Oh, you've got but that's for that, not for the room. That's for the live stream.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But I think we'll check with these folks. Let's each person check with the folks at the back. Okay.
I gotta fly out tomorrow.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me at the back? Oh, this battery just died. 111. Can you all hear me at the back? Yeah. If this thing dies, which is possible, I know that Wes Milner has an exceptionally loud voice. Can you still hear me at the back? Yep. Yeah. Okay. I don't think this thing's going to work. So my name is James McLeod. I'm Chair of History at the University of Evansville, and it's also my great privilege to be the chair of the Morgan Stankey-Andiron Lecture series. And I wanted to welcome you all here today. I think it's a testament to Morgan Whitaker Stankey, to the Andiron Lecture series, and to Wes Milner, that so many people from different eras and different aspects of the life of the university are here. So thank you all for being here and welcome. Just a word about what it is that we're doing here. Morgan Stankey was a graduate at the University of Evansville, 2009. She was a student of mine. She was a student of several people in this room. Wes was her advisor and had her in class as well. And Morgan very sadly passed away last year. And Morgan was someone who left a disproportionate imprint behind her, someone who left a really enormous impression on everybody who knew her and had the privilege of spending time with her as a student at the University of Evansville. A triple major in history, politics, and international studies. There aren't many people that have the nerve to even try doing that, and few people pulled it off the way that Morgan did. And the one thing, there's a really eloquent tribute to Morgan in your program there, and not to go over all of that, but simply to say one of the things that always struck me as I reflect on Morgan is that I think most people would remember Morgan for her smile, for her laughter, for her sense of humor, someone who saw the funny side and was constantly laughing. And yet Morgan was also one of these rare undergraduates who also took life extremely seriously. who cared deeply about her fellow human beings and cared deeply about the state of the world and the future of the world, and worked hard during her life to make the world a better place. So in the pain and regret and sadness of thinking about Morgan after she passed, we very quickly with the family came up with this wonderful idea to do something that would permanently memorialize her at the University of Evansville. The Andiron Lecture series was something that had been a really important part of intellectual and academic and cultural life here on campus since the early 1980s. But like many other things, it kind of stalled around about the time of the pandemic. And we got our heads together and realized that maybe a really nice idea would be to relaunch the Andiron Lecture series, but have it as a way that we could permanently remember Morgan Whitaker Stankey. So I can't tell you how incredibly privileged I feel to be up here introducing the first speaker, the inaugural speaker, and welcoming you all to the inaugural lecture. Before going any further, I did want to ask Morgan's mom, Michelle Dorsey, to say a few words to you, so I will pass this over to Michelle now.
Sure.
Okay, those of you who know me know that I talk too much. So I wrote it down, and I'm probably going to read it so I can get through it too, so forgive me for that. When James first came up with this idea of continuing the Andiron in Morgan's name, I told him, and I mean it, it was the happiest day I've had since Morgan passed. Today, I'm truly happy because of James, Wes, and all of you who have supported this whole Andiron thing by coming, by your gifts, by your support of us. It really feels good. This is a perfect thing to honor Morgan's life. She was an academic at heart. She would just love this and love that Dr. Dion is here and Dr. Milner is here and James is here because I heard about them all the time. James, thank you for the conception and the execution of this lecture. You were so influential in Morgan's life. And she would have loved that song. She loved all music. So thank you, my dear. Wes, thank you for making the trip, for delivering what I know is going to be a fabulous lecture, and for taking care of my baby for so many years. I know she was a lot of work, but you took good care of her during her time here and after, and I really thank you for that. To all of you, thank you for your love and your support. We are deeply moved to know that because of you, Morgan's legacy will go on through this endowment. You have no idea how much this means at this time, so thank you so much. We are having a reception afterwards. I hope you'll all stay so we can visit with each of you, because I see people have come that I didn't know came, so I'd like to see you. So thank you so much. See, I did it. It wasn't
I always wondered why there were 2 loose batteries lying on these tables, and now they're not. Thank you, Michelle. And I know that you all are here to hear Wes, and there's a very elegant description of Wes in the program as well. I suspect Wes wrote it himself. It's so elegant. But it struck me just as I was saying that Morgan was someone who was known for having a wonderful sense of humor, combined with a profound sense of seriousness, and someone who took the world seriously and cared deeply about other people and the way the world is. And I can't think of a better description than that for Professor Wes Milner. And so it's my real privilege to introduce my friend and my colleague, Dr. Wes Milner.
Good afternoon, and thank y'all so much for turning out. I hope I can get through this without bawling, but most of y'all that know me and many that don't know that I'm quite passionate and a crier. But thanks to Dr. James McLeod, the entire department, Dan Byrne, Bob Dyan, but especially to Michelle and Stuart and Michael for sharing Morgan with us. And I know that we all compete for her, and we have for so many years. Even when she was here, we were doing the majors, and no, she's mine. She's yours. I was so fortunate to stay in touch, both with Michael and Michelle and Stuart, even traveling to Texas many times to seeing them, and Morgan. I saw her in person in London, an alumni event in Frankfurt. We would Zoom every 3 or 4 months, and she continued to be a beacon for you, a beacon for me. And indeed, as I tell my students, I say, you know, the dirty secret, and we faculty know that we learn more than the students do. And that was definitely true with Morgan. So thank you so much for coming. We'll do a little dance through peace in an unstable world. We'll see, Dr. Burns said, oh, so you're going to solve Middle East peace in 20, 30 minutes. So I'll leave that to the historians. We political scientists, as my lovely wife Sue would say, please don't make any predictions. Every time you make a prediction, it's wrong. So I won't make any predictions. How do we conceptualize peace? I think in this day and age, it's a bit, some might say, Pollyannish or naive to even think about peace studies, even international relations more generally. But I think it's really important. It's vitally important. How do we conceptualize as political scientists? We want to measure everything and say, okay, how do we measure peace? How do we look at variables that impact peace? But ultimately, for us as individuals, we need to see what are we going to do with it, right? How are we going to go out into the world? And as I tell my students, and I just told them this week, I'm teaching a course on global politics, and it's an honors seminar, and I tell them, I said, y'all are the future. I have the best job in the world. Every week I get to look at the face of the future. And I'm excited. And they're like, no. I'm like, yeah, you Gen Z, these old folks have jacked it up. Y'all are the solution, and you can do it. And I think Morgan exemplified that. I think our students here at U of V do that. So let's take a little stroll through this. We know that we're all interconnected. International relations, we talk about globalization, especially since the Cold War. We just went through Hurricane Helene. Susan was flying, I was cut off, no cell service or internet for 6 days. It was actually glorious. But the first time I can remember since I had a cell phone. But we expect to be connected by trade, sometimes by pandemic. I think in the past we'd say, well, we can isolate ourselves from the pain, the suffering. We can't. We can't isolate ourselves from each other, whether it's next door or across the world. Okay? So this idea of, is globalization a thing, almost like climate change? We shouldn't debate it anymore, but in terms of how do we deal with it, that is a very serious debate. I was hoping there might be more students, because when I show this picture or one like it, I said, does anybody know these folks? And they're like, oh, not getting it. Like, come on. The one on the right, Nelson Mandela. Yes, I only saw him from a distance once. We were living in D.C. He'd just been released. Susan and I were at a play at Ford's Theater, a one-act play, Sheila's Day. And the lead ran out on the stage and said, Nelson is free. It was our anniversary. And I thought, oh my God, those of y'all have been to Robben Island, 18 years on Robben Island, 27 years, and he comes out, and who's this gentleman on the left? Archbishop Desmond Tutu. That, and being a human rights scholar, we were fortunate enough, and I will say, to Gene Beckman and my chair at the time, and the department with Bob Dyan, they allowed me to go teach on semester at sea and have a sabbatical. Little did I know the Archbishop would join for 4 months. So we learned so much. The students would ask him, and germane to this question of peace, they said, how are we going to deal with the Middle East? How are we going to deal with Muslims and Jews, Christians? Hindu, Baha'i, anybody. And he was very, God love him, 3 years he's passed, but he was very impish. And he laughed like Rafiki. And he stopped. And he said, unless we look at our friends and more importantly our enemies, truly as brothers and sisters, we have no hope. But if we can do that, nothing is impossible. And I've kept that with me over these years. And this, just for the record, for the historians who probably know this, Vilakazi Street in Soweto, some of you may have been there, the only street in the world with 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners that once lived there, both of them. So, Nelson said, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he really pushed the close phrase of Ubuntu. I am because we are. I only exist in relation to you. And he said, we think of ourselves as isolated, but we're all connected. And when we do good individually, it spreads through the world. And it's like, okay, this is possible. Anything is possible. Ubuntu. So, it's a tense world. There's a lot of conflict. Blessedly, there's just 6 more days, right? That we have to live through this. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of rancor. And most people are just sick. And not just here. Half the world will choose new leaders this year. Half the world. Amazing. Lots of opportunity, lots of challenges. We've seen a huge shift throughout the world against democracy, more towards right-wing authoritarianism. It's very worrisome. I tell my students, this is just an experiment. Democracy, 240 years in the United States, do not take it for granted. Do not assume anything. And the old adage, yeah, people have died, they've gone to battle for your right to vote, but it's true, right? You have to be engaged. You have to be engaged. So, we'll see as we get a little closer to next week. Hopefully, well, either way, it will be at least that part of the tension. Well, and then, of course, we got the vote counting that many of y'all know from 2020 and 2000. So, we'll see. Lots of tensions. Iran, and for years, and even in my class, I say, we don't spend a whole lot of time on nuclear weapons because no one would use them again. And I said, well, how many nuclear powers do we have? Who in the world would use nuclear weapons on? Oh, I'm sorry. Just us, just the U.S. Who has ever done it? But last year, and those Christopher Nolan fans, an amazing movie. Although I had students going, it's not Nolan's best movie. I said, it's a good movie. Right? See it. Take it to heart. This is really, really important. Lots of movement here. We're very concerned about North Korea. We're concerned also about China, which keeps ratcheting up. Yes, they're a global superpower, but they're wanting to be maybe the superpower, the hegemonic leader. We'll see. Is there room for everybody? I don't know. Non-proliferation, we've tried. This idea of peace isn't a new thing. This has been going on since the 1960s. And part of it, like most things after post-World War II, to the victor go the spoils. We get to make the rules. Economically, politically, nuclearly, right? And so we have nukes. We don't want other people to have them. And they're like, well, wait a minute. And back to South Africa. South Africa is the only country that's ever given them up. And many would say that's because after the end of apartheid, the minority whites said, oh, I don't think, we're going to keep the money and we'll give up the politics and the vote to the rest of the Africans, but I don't think we should allow them to have nuclear weapons. So we're going to give those up. We have had lots of arms control. Those of y'all that are old enough to remember the Cold War, amazing progress between the U.S. and Soviet Union, now the U.S. and Russia. But really the last decade, not much progress at all. So this is very worrisome. And as we see North Korea, as we see many of these countries ramping this up, more worrisome. Recent conflicts that are in your feed every day. the forgotten war, Sudan. Some of you may remember Darfur from 20 years ago. Human rights scholars, we follow this at Janjaweed. We forget about it. A UE alumnus, Andy Burnett, who some of y'all may have known. Andy and I have stayed close, like many of my students. He's been on the Sudan desk at State Department for, gosh, a dozen years. I was fortunate enough to travel with Institute for International Education to the State Department and met with Andy in Sudan right before all hell broke loose. And this most recent hell in the last year has just been devastating. Of 51 million people, 10 million have been displaced. 10 million. And how many are following this? Not many, right? Not many. How do we solve this? Well, and there's been, as I say, 20 years of conflict there. The most recent country at the UN, South Sudan, from 2011, and then another civil war there, and now we have this brutal, brutal battle for control. And who's watching? No one's watching. The media's not watching. State Department is watching, but the world's not watching. Yeah. As you'll see with any of these, lots of displaced persons. That'll be kind of a common theme in these few minutes. Yeah, just devastating, absolutely devastating. This one you're probably more familiar with, right? Russia and Ukraine. Like good international relations scholars and political scientists, that whole idea of nuclear war and even a land war in Europe, not going to happen, right? We've got NATO. We've got too much at stake economically. We've evolved too much in terms of human rights. And then some would say overnight. If you think back, again, I always tell my students, I am not an historian. If you want real facts, you gotta go to an historian, right? A political scientist, we play fast and loose. But if you look back to Crimea, 2014, this is not a new thing. Russia has been engaging for quite some time. Now, you could argue, well, come on, not unlike the Anschluss and not unlike moving in the Sudetenland as we were ramping up to World War II, they're Russian peoples, right? Luhansk, Donetsk, yeah. But it's a major land war in the heart of Europe. This is worrisome, or it should be. But even the scrappy, right? You get a comedian that becomes a politician and a president, right? And he rallies the troops. And instead of Moscow marching into Kyiv in 3 days, we're 3 years into this, and God bless them, they're still scrapping. Is it a stalemate? Yes. Can it win? And even here, right? You've got Ukrainians actually going to the Kursk. You're talking about chutzpah. I mean, that's crazy, but there you go. So what's going to happen? It may hinge on what happens in Europe. It may hinge on what happens next week in this election. But this conflict goes on. And unlike Sudan, most of us are watching because, well, this is Europe, right? So what's it going to do to the alliances? And if you look at the presidential race, I mean, during the Trump administration and now with the Biden administration, vastly different ideas of what the role of American allies are and will be. It remains to be seen. I think there's been a lot of progress over the last few years, but people are very ethereal in terms of how much money they will spend, how much attention we have in terms of these conflicts. We're very, not unlike our students on TikTok, our attention span, especially for conflict and especially for taxpayer money, is not unlimited. Okay, this is a tough one. Dr. Byrne, here you go. You can help me address this. I can remember years ago, actually when I was a UE Global Scholar, and I got funding, thank you U of E, and went to South Africa, actually went to the Middle East, was lucky, maybe, Susan calls me an unlucky penny. I was in Beirut during elections and I was not an official observer, but I went just like a kid, just checking out the process, right? This summer, I was in Hungary and with another UE alumnus who was a contemporary of Morgan's, Carolina Toth, who some of you have, and I went and voted with her. I'm in like at the booth and I said, is this like coppa setting? Like, yeah, come on. So I was sitting there and says, oh my God, democracy at work here in Hungary. Go figure. So how do we deal with this? How does the U.S., how do the people? There have been attempts, right? There have been attempts. There have been peacemakers. Jimmy Carter, he just turned 100. He voted again in this election. The longest lived president in U.S. history, 100 years old, right? And we thought, Camp David, is it possible? Could we hold out hope? Just a few years later, a lot of years later, 30 years ago, Oslo. We in international relations thought, this is going to be it. We're going to see it. We're going to see real progress, tangible progress. Fleeting, right? Even recently, even during the Trump administration, right? You had normalized relations with the Abrahamic Accords. And folks were like, oh my gosh, just days before October 7th. And the terrorist attack from Hamas into Israel, a blatant violation of international law, human rights, 1,200 people killed. We, the international community, was so close with Israel and Saudi Arabia of normalizing relations. Fleeting, right? After October 7th, devastation. Not surprising, Israel says, hold my beer, right? Unrelentless. A year. It's been a year. 43,000 Palestinians killed. 101,000 casualties. And in international relations, my students get upset at me because I say, we all want things in black and white. International relations is gray. Can both of these things be true? Can Hamas, a terrorist organization from the State Department, violate international law, kill 1,200 people, and Israel respond disproportionately and violate international law as well? I would say, yeah, right. It doesn't mean one's worse than the other, one's better than the other, but for those that are pushing for peace, it's devastating, absolutely devastating. Iron Dome, I mean, there's lots of military that are saying, oh my God, we're testing all these weapons, we're seeing if things happen. We've got incursions. Israel assassinates the leader of Hamas and Hezbollah, not in Gaza, not in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, in Tehran and Beirut. Whew. Positive, negative, horrific, you decide. Devastation, devastation, devastation. War, sometimes we must go to war, sometimes we can't have peace. It's never good for the non-combatants. Never, ever, ever. It's not good for the next generation. Devastating. I mean, this is what we're looking at. Recently, in the last year, it looks like any of the wars and the evacuations you saw from World War II, right? Devastating. Even coming to this great country. 3 Palestinian students are shot on college campuses. Crazy town. Right? So, what's going to happen? We don't know. We don't know. But the peacemakers, the diplomats, those that are pushing for peace cannot back down. They cannot say, we're going to throw up our hands. The stakes are just too high. So, if we're looking at this from an analytical standpoint, you can see here the darker, the more devastation with 10,000. Some of these, probably not surprising, Mexico, God love Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially, there was a foreign policy article years ago talking about a case of bad latitude, that those countries that are along the equator, man, it's tough to develop, tough to feed people, and there's a lot of conflict. Empirically, you're saying, wait a minute, I think that's a spurious relationship, but you can see here a lot of death and a lot of devastation. And these are pretty recent data from Uppsala. Yeah, just scary. Now, since World War II, we'd say, wow, there's been some eras. Things have looked pretty good. And if you look at the data, the U.S. doesn't get involved in many wars. Iraq, Afghanistan, the longest war, even before Vietnam, Korea. World War II, but most of these wars are now in the developing world, right? And you've got many more non-state actors, terrorist organization, non-state actors. This, and if you're looking at different regions, yeah, a lot in the Middle East, right, here, but then here, right, lots in Africa, whoa, a big bump up in Europe, right? And we are somewhat anglicized, Eurocentric, and maybe those of y'all remember the Yugoslav wars when we saw emaciated white men behind barbed wire going, oh my God, it could be another genocide, we have to act. And it's like, well, have you looked at sub-Saharan Africa over the last 30 years? Maybe we should act there too. But overall, at least during this period, post-Cold War, things were really, really, really looking promising. So I think those that study peace in the last 5 to 10 years are really concerned that the trajectory is not going in the right direction. And this is breaking down interstate wars between countries versus intrastate, more civil conflicts, and then lots of this, as you can see, where intrastate conflicts involving foreign troops. Just this last week, the Department of Defense and the CIA confirmed that North Korea is sending troops, not just weapons, to Russia to fight on the front with Ukraine. Ratcheting up, moving the ante, very worrisome. My students struggle with this because I said conflict, armed conflict, that's tangible. Climate change, the fuse is just too long, right? We, Susan and I, just lived through Hurricane Helene, leaving Evansville, lots of tornadoes, right? Drought. We moved to Asheville and we think, it's climate change mecca. What could happen? A 1,000-year flood. Literally, a 1,000-year flood. Now, those of y'all from Texas, and y'all know I'm from Texas, you know, Houston's had 3 500-year floods in the last 5 years. So, yeah. But climate change and conflict are absolutely inextricably linked. You old folks out there can remember the original Mad Maxes, right? Where you're fighting for resources. But that's what we've seen in the Middle East. That's what we see in sub-Saharan Africa. That's what we see in the America West, right? Fighting over the Colorado River. Farmers, urban folks, building subdevelopments, all fighting for these natural resources. This is going to get worse. Some of y'all may listen to Marketplace, Kai Risdall, who used to be a Navy pilot in the Cold War. And he said, for 70 years, the Department of Defense has been doing climate analyses. Go figure, right? And they're saying, we've got to do something. We as a planet, we as the US, we as the Congress and the Department of Defense, because as you can see, temperatures rise, it increases disasters, migration, more tensions, fight over resources. It doesn't end well. It will end in conflict. It's almost inevitable. So it's not just we want to save the planet and address climate change for climate change's sake. We want to do it to avoid conflict, to avoid death. I also tell my students, they're like, oh my God, get this old white dead Texan off the stage. I say, when people don't like politics, I get it, right? And this election season, who likes politics? But I say, as a political scientist and a citizen, if you look around the world, when people get politics right, people prosper. People thrive. And when people get politics wrong, people die. That's a fact. That's the empirical evidence. So it's really, really, really important. This, over the last decade, I've been probably more involved with than even human rights, although it's tangentially linked, is global displacement. Internally displaced persons, refugees, externally displaced, it has gone off the chart. 131 million people, well, in the next month or two. What do you do with this? I mean, we feel it in the US, feel it in Europe, feel it outside the borders of Sudan, Burma, right? Everywhere. These people have to be addressed. these challenges have to be addressed. So, stepping back, international relations scholar, we want to be analytical, right? How are we going to address this? Well, typically we think about an individual level, us, presidents, prime ministers, State Department officials, or we can say the state, the government. You got interest groups, you got governmental agencies, national interest, national security, or you've got the international system. We've got these alliances, we've got NATO, European Union, multinational corporations. We thought globalization was going to save us, right? We trade our pants off. Bill Clinton goes to China. Even before, right? You had Nixon and Kissinger going to China. See, the more we integrate, the more we pull folks in, we're less likely to kill each other. Maybe, but then you got growing inequality, you still got Walmart, and you got Amazon, you got cheap stuff, but does it really dissipate conflict? I don't know. There's been a lot of discussion of the UN. I always beat up on the UN. It's really a love-hate relationship. NATO, African Union, all these regional ones, some success, but a lot of frustration and missed opportunities, I think. But does that mean, y'all may have seen the old Nicole Kidman from years ago called The Interpreter, only movie that ever shot in the United Nations, and Sidney Pollack's last film. And they said, why the hell do you do what you do? You're an interpreter at the UN. And she said, when I'm interpreting, they are not shooting. They may shoot next week, but when I'm interpreting from them, they're in dialogue. They are talking. May not lead to anything, but it's positive. So, keeping on this idea of measurement, like good political scientists, and we can dicker around the measurement and all of that, but there's a fragile states index. How fragile, how unstable are countries? And here, blue is good, right? Ooh, really deep red, not so good. All right? Now wait a minute. U.S., whoa, we're stable-ish, but we're not sustainable. Canada, A, doing okay. Australia, New Zealand, Scandinavia, yeah, baby, right? They're doing okay. They're doing all right. Russia, not so much. Horn of Africa, yeah. No surprise. I mean, if you follow the news at all, these would be, even if you didn't have accurate measurements or verifiable data, you would say, okay, that makes sense. So, where do we go from here? How do we deal with it? How do we not get so depressed and downtrodden that we don't just give up? And I worry about my students. I mean, for some of us, we're getting pretty old. And we're like, okay. But you got the Jimmy Carters. You're 100 years old. You're still fighting the good fight. The Carter Center was, those elections I showed you for this year, Carter Center's at every one. Verifying, trying to see, are these free and fair elections? Or is there more corruption? So, International Day of Peace, most people blow right through it. Last month, okay, Day of Peace, but at least it gives us a sense of pause. Or this NGO that says, hey, let's think about the complexities of peace. Governance, education. Obviously, we believe in education. Business, free market economies and the way to deal with it. Health, science, relationships, religion, spirituality, the environment, our habitat, and indeed culture. Right? The culture of the U.S. Someone say, well, we're a very peaceful country. Right? Are we? Is it? There's a global peace index. 23 different components in 3 areas that really dig down to say, oh really? How peaceful are you as a country? And here we're talking about states. Here you can say very high, very low, and not included, not enough data. Okay? So you're sitting here looking at the U.S. going, not looking too good. Wow. Russia. Again, Sub-Saharan Africa, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Myanmar, Burma. Maybe not a surprise, yeah. Which ones are the top ones? What do you think? New Zealand, Iceland, Ireland, Austria. The ones on the tail end, Sudan, South Sudan, Afghanistan, yep. U.S., 136. You say, how can that be? Could be the vitriol, right? The political unrest. Could be gun violence. 46,000 people dead, whether you love guns or not. That's a lot of death. That's a lot of conflict, okay? Yeah, here you go. Iceland, Ireland, Austria, New Zealand, Singapore. I forgot Singapore. Now, you may remember the caning from years ago. Kid that was, American that was chewing bubble gum, I think, and spit it on the street. They caned him. Lots of order in Singapore. Yeah, but in terms of conflict and peace, and this is measuring negative peace, pretty good. Yeah, you're going through Japan, Croatia, Hungary, maybe not real surprising. Some would be surprised about the US. Or maybe you're like, oh, I think we should be lower. I don't feel very safe. And in this political environment, there's arguments about crime, right? People say that there's rampant crime. If you look over the last decade, violent crime is way down, but inequality is way up. So, lots of challenges. So, I would argue that many of our students at U of E are already doing it. The change making, it had a huge impact on me. And I say that we were kind of, well, I won't say about the Institute, but kind of accidental change makers, right? We started messing with Ashoka, and it's like, hey, this resonates, right? We can change lives. Hell, let's put it in the tagline. Changing lives, changing the world. Own it, believe it. The students will own it. The students will believe it. When I was here, it wasn't me, it was some of my wonderful faculty colleagues, but it was students. Bev Fowler, who started recruiting, accidentally maybe, a Syrian refugee here, a displaced student from Yemen there, and before long we had the highest number of Syrian displaced students in the country, not percentage. I remember when University of Southern California, they had this big article, we got 5 Syrian students. I was like, shut up. You're USC. You got so much stinking money. We've had 25. U of E, right? Scholars for Syria, changing the world, right? Welcome Corps on campus. I took what I learned here. I've gone to Western Carolina University and the UNC system. There's 16 universities in the University of North Carolina system. And y'all know me. Hopefully I'm emblematic of John Lewis and making good trouble and stirring the pot going, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we? State Department just has a new program where students, refugee students, vetted through the UN can come. Students are sponsored by the campus. A campus in every campus of refuge, we got everything. We've got food, we've got security, we've got education, we've got language. It's a perfect microcosm to welcome refugees. You say, well, I don't know. As y'all know, the students you've had, and when we would talk with businesses here in Vanderburgh County and beyond, they said, best students we ever had, best interns we ever had, best employees and best citizens we've ever had. I follow up on these students. They're starting businesses. They're in med school. They're buying up property and they're entrepreneurs in Vanderburgh County. Amazing, amazing. So I want to take that to North Carolina. And indeed, a new State Department program, Welcome Corps on Campus, is doing just that. That students can come in, they're vetted with the UN, they get permanent residency after a year, they can work, they're Pell eligible, they can get citizenship after 5 years, they'll be citizens, right? And you may say, well, how big is the problem? Well, we're trying to get 15 by 30. 15%. You may say, okay, how many are eligible? There are 500,000 refugee students that are eligible. 500,000. All we want is 15%. Right now, we're at 5 to 7. Really? There's another program called Everyone Take One. Every university in the United States, just take one. Just take one. Y'all already know. I'm preaching to the choir that started the chorus. Right? Continue on. My students, they're like, oh, here he goes again. They're like, we can't solve this. We got to find somebody else. Y'all remember? 2008? Don't wait for the change. You're the change. We're the change. Get off your butts and go change the world. Change making, right? Changing lives, changing the world. We are the change that we're seeking. Now this one's a tough one, especially in this election season. Looking way back, and I'm sorry, historians, right? If you look back, this is President Lincoln's first inaugural address. And that old, famous, all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched as surely as they will be by the better angels of our nature. We have to maintain the Union. And God love these folks, and some of you may have engaged them. I have not, but I'm intrigued. They've taken a play on it, braver angels. Their intention is to get folks that are vitriolically at each other's throats politically and putting them together. Having a real, honest dialogue about immigration, about taxes, about racism, about inequality. God love you, but they're having success, right? Change makers. It's not for the meek. And it's not for the naysayers. It's for those that have dedication, and you know in your hearts because you've seen it work. We all have, but it gets, obliterated by all the just terrible stuff. I'll leave you with, oh my God, Milner, I don't think has ever hit the time mark. Y'all are wonderful. I'll leave you with Anne Lamott. Some may know her. I wouldn't necessarily say you think of her as a peacemaker. I mean, she's been writing for years. She just turned 70. Look at her. She's somebody you want to sit down and have a bottle of wine with, isn't she? And her newest book, somehow, Thoughts on Love. And she says, when you get to a certain age, you know that the palace lies of if you do this and you do that, you'll be rich and happy. No. It's love and service. That's what will bring you happiness. That's what will bring you peace. And that's what will bring this world peace. So I would say, get out and vote. Be empathetic. Engage the other. And that's the tough one, right? Pick your religion. Reaching out across the aisle, across the Gandhian Gulf to the other, it's really hard. It's a lot easier to be venal and vitriolic and hateful and resentful because you're right and they're wrong. But what if we work together? What if we reach across the abyss? What if we think about service and love like Anne Lamott? Or how about we follow the example of Morgan Whitaker Stankey? Thank y'all so much. I don't know, do we have time for questions? Y'all might say, okay, that's it. He hit the mark. Go on.
3 questions, Wes.
Dr. Byrne.
Ukraine also gave up its nuclear weapons.
Ukraine what?
Gave up its nuclear weapons.
Oh, there you go. See there? Lean on. Now, you could argue, though, that they were Soviet weapons, but you're right. You're absolutely right. Leave it to a historian to correctly call out the political scientists. Thank you.
With all the negative news media coverage, whether we left or right, it's all negative. They want to drag our attention. How can we dissect this information and find out what really is the truth? What news sources can we go to that help us out?
From an informational?
Absolutely.
I've got a chart in class, and it's called, I should have pulled it up, and it dissects all the different media markets.
Adfontis Media.
What is it?
Adfontis Media? Is it that one?
All sides.
Similar, they're a couple.
Yeah.
All sides.
What?
All sides.
Okay.
All sides.
Yeah, all sides. I don't think that. Anyway, yes. To answer your question, a wonderful, esteemed community leader, John Hubers. Yeah, you have to, and I push my students, and I say, I want you to pick really diverse, not TikTok, right? Get off TikTok and Instagram. Diverse media. But it's really hard. We get in our ruts. So yeah, they've given you some, but there's another one that's really good, that's got some great diagrams. Yes?
How to do a pitch for Change Lab and Carter, who's running Use Lab, and it's all about that, finding the news from one side and another.
Because it feeds on itself, right? You want to hear what you know is right. You don't want to listen to that crap that you think's wrong. But I tell the student, follow the data. Don't follow the crazy, follow the data. If people say there's lots of immigration, check it. People say crime's up, check it. If people say there's been more abortions in the U.S. since the Dobbs decision, check the facts. See what's going on. What's going on in your community? What's going on in your neighborhood? What's going on in your state? Don't take somebody's opinion. Hell, don't take some crazy political scientist's opinion, right? What do we know? We need historians to constantly check us. Other
According
questions?
to my data, that's 3 questions.
Thank y'all so much.
Please join the family and Wes at the reception outside. We had to fill out a bunch of forms to get alcohol at this reception. Just take advantage. We'd love to have you.